Hey guys, I'm here behind the camera. You're going to see me in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about uh, putting values into your drawings. Uh, First thing I want to go over, something I noticed that a lot of you guys have kind of been messing up with your eggs, is that when you have a surface that is curved and there's a shadow on that curving surface, the shadow will gradually change from dark to light as the surface curves. So a good example of this is right here on the forehead. This part right here that's faced away from, so our light source is coming this direction on the picture, and this part that's faced away from the light source, this will be the darkest, but as that skull curves gradually towards that light source, it's going to go from the darkest darks to light really gradually. Some of you guys were putting just a single hard line there in your eggs, and that's not quite right. The other thing I want to talk about is that light, wherever it hits, that's going to be the brightest part, right? And then wherever it curves away is going to be the darkest. But the other thing is, so I haven't actually put this in yet, but there's going to be shadows down here next to the skull. When light hits something and that object blocks the light, it's going to cast a shadow. Whenever you see a cast shadow, that shadow will have a hard line. So you guys remember with the egg, the shadow that it cast onto the plate had a hard line. And the last thing I really want to emphasize here is, take a look. See, next to the jawbone, we've got a little bit of value here to define the lighter jawbone here. But up above, you can't see this very well. You can see just a tiny, really light line that I drew back up to define that edge of the skull. When I'm finished with this picture, I don't want that line there to be what defines the three-dimensionality of the skull. I'm going to have to put down some value along there to define it. So with a value drawing, with a drawing that uses shadow, never use line to define the objects. You should only use shadow and light. Whenever you're taking the tip of your pencil and drawing in lines, you're doing cartoon drawings. You're not doing realistic drawings. So we've done line drawing. We did that already. Now it's time to move on and to start using light and shadow to define the three-dimensionality of an object. So let me just review really quickly our steps, and this should be apparent in the pictures and in the explanation that I gave you, but I want to be very thorough about explaining this. So step one for any drawing is going to be to establish an accurate contour. To check on your contour and to make sure that you get it right, you're going to start by laying out basic shapes. So with this skull, I started with a simple oval shape, and then I checked the proportions. So what I did was I made a line down the middle. I divided it into sections of where the eyes would be, where the nasal cavity would be, and then where the teeth would be. I did not draw in the teeth. So you're going to lay out basic proportions, but don't draw in all of the little minute details initially. That's a recipe for disaster. Leave that stuff alone. What I did do after I laid out all my proportions was I checked them. I made sure that everything looked right. One thing I want to point out with ocular cavities, with where the eyes would be if it was a person's face, it helps to not think of them as eyes. It helps to think of them as the shapes that they actually are as they appear in the image. My daughter saw me drawing in the ocular cavities and she said, "Oh, that looks like sunglasses." So it may help you to think of them as sunglasses and not as eyes. But try to really focus on the shapes you're seeing and don't think of it as, oh, this is the nose, this is the eyes, this is the cheekbones. Just really focus on what you're actually seeing and not what you imagine you're seeing. Okay, so let's talk about teeth. So I've got my dark and light shadows, I've got my proportions laid out, everything's ready to go. The very last step, after you get all that stuff, and as you are doing all those steps, contour, basic shapes, checking proportions, largest and darkest shadows. As you're doing all of that, whenever you make a mistake, always be double checking. Are my shadows dark enough? Are things in the right places? Is it too wide or too narrow? Is it looking funny? If it looks off, fix it. And then once you've got everything laid out where it needs to go and everything's feeling just right, the last step will be to put in the smallest detail. So now I'm ready for teeth. Maybe you can see I've very, very lightly with my HB pencil sketched in where the teeth are going to go. And I'm not, with the finished product, I'm not going to use any line to define the three-dimensionality of it. Sorry, I'm adjusting the camera here. I'm going to focus in a little bit on the teeth. This is going to be a little tricky because I'm going to try to draw without blocking your view. So I'm giving a little disclaimer from the get-go that this might not be the most amazing drawing I've ever done, but we'll do our best. So there's a shadow along here. So all along here, this little space from the nasal cavity to where the teeth start, this is all bone. And where these teeth insert into that bone, it's a curved shape. And I'm going to define that curved shape by putting a shadow right there. And what that shadow is going to do is it's going to tell your eye if there's a curve right there. The light's coming from this side, so this side is not in a shadow. There's another shadow over here. I'm going to start putting that in. See how all my lines are going kind of diagonal? My hand naturally moves this direction. You don't want to put in shadows this way and up and down and that way in all different directions. Try to keep your pencil work all going in the same direction. The quality of the drawing is going to come out a lot better. Okay, so between the tooth here and here, there's going to be a dark shadow. I'm not going to fill that in as a line. I'm going to do a nice dark shadow. It goes down through here. All the detail, all the three-dimensionality is going to be established by laying down shadows. There's another shadow along this edge of this tooth, but this shadow is not as dark as the one that I just laid down. But then there is a darker area to that shadow right here. The tooth is curving around, and there's a little gap between that tooth and the next tooth, and there's going to be a darker shadow in between the two, and then that shadow is going to get a little darker here. Alright, so darkest shadow here in that gap, a little bit of a shadow right here where the tooth angles, a little bit of a shadow right here, and then there's going to be some dark shadows underneath. So nice dark shadow right there, a little bit lighter shadow right there, and I'm going to keep filling in those shadows. Remember to look constantly at the image that you're using as a reference. Check and make sure you're doing it right every time. Do not draw out of your imagination. That's not what we're doing with this project, and that's not what we're doing in this class. Later on, if you want to draw with your imagination, that's okay. I know some of you guys might be going, what kind of art teacher tells me not to use my imagination? Please use your imagination, but that's just not the activity we're doing right now. Alright, so those teeth are starting to take shape. They're starting to emerge as I'm laying down all those shadows. Let's see, there's going to be another shadow right there. There's a pretty dark shadow right there. So, define the teeth by using shadows and not by drawing them in one by one, which is going to be your temptation. You're going to want to do that. I have a lot of students with this project skip right ahead to the teeth. Save them for last. Okay, I'm going to finish this up and I'm going to take a picture of the end result and include it in the instructions. If you have any questions, let me know. Really quick review. Define all areas with shadow. In fact, since I'm thinking of it, I'm going to work on this little area up above here. So, here, let's do this. To define this area right here, I'm going to put some shadow along the side. So, I was using my number 6 pencil, but now I'm going to switch over to my HB. I don't want this shadow to be super dark. If you look in the picture that we're using as a reference, that shadow next to the skull on this side is not super dark because the light source is coming from this side. See how I'm holding my pencil sideways? That's enabling me to lay down a little bit more value a little faster instead of just using the tip of the pencil. You don't have to draw everything around the skull in the picture. We're focusing on the skull, but you do need to include value all the way around it so that you don't have to use the tip of your pencil to define it. Okay, so always use value to create contrast, to define the three-dimensionality of your objects. Start with basic shapes and proportions. After that's all right, then add in your darkest shadows and save your finest details for the end. All right, we'll see ya.